This video is going to walk you through long-range planning here at Charleston Southern University. You are going to create this semester a long-range plan in your methods class. Any questions that you have, please refer them to your methods instructor. Then you will next semester during clinical practice, you will create or revise your long-range plan and submit it again during the clinical practice semester. So let me walk you through long-range planning. On the left of your screen, you're going to see a quick PowerPoint that will help us kind of stay focused. On the other side of the screen, you're going to see the actual document. You're going to be able to find this document in Blackboard. This document you will download onto your computer and complete all the information and save it onto your computer. So the long-range plan has many sections in it, and we will go through each section individually. The first section is all about your students, the student information section. Section 2 are your learning and or developmental goals. Section 3 is your instructional units. Section 4 is evaluating student progress of achievements. Section 5, we've added this year, is the student learning outcomes, or the SLOs, and those are things that your cooperating teacher at their school is already doing. Section 6 is all about classroom management. You'll talk about rules, procedures, instructional and non-instructional routines. How are you going to communicate with your parents? And then finally, you want to talk about adjusting the long-range plan, because that is a really important part of this. So section 1, and you can see over on the other side of the screen as well, is your student information section. So you're going to provide a description of your students, any information that you think is going to impact the way you plan to teach them. So you could include gender, socioeconomic status, reading levels, math levels, any other levels you may have, activities they participate in or outside of school. So on the chart, you're going to list what is your factor. You're going to then describe your student. So for example, if you were doing gender, you might have gender as your factor. Then you're going to break down your students. So if you have 26 students in your class and you have 14 female students, then you would have 12 male students. And then the source, this is where you're going to get that information from. So you're going to want to list, was it through observation? Was it through records? For example, reading levels may come from student records. Did you get it from the cooperating teacher? So you want to talk about who or where you got this information from. Try and organize this in a chart form. Makes it easier for you to understand and anyone who's looking at your long-range plan to understand. And then finally, after you have that chart, you're going to want to make sure you do the reflection. So reflect on this student information. Why do you feel that this information is of importance? And how and where did you get this information? And how is it going to guide the development of both your long and short range plans in this class? Every section of the long range plan has a reflection, so please don't forget to do that. Section 2 are your learning and or developmental goals. These are going to be your long range, long-term goals for the class. They're typically based on the major standards for your subjects, but you kind of take what the standards are and put them in your own words. You're going to want to have 5, 6, 7 major learning or developmental goals for your students. And you're going to be able to put those in a chart, or you can list them in the actual document. Either way works. After you list your learning or developmental goals, you're going to want to reflect. So reflect on these long-term learning and or developmental goals. Why are these your goals? Why are they important? Why are they important for all students to achieve? So don't forget about the reflection. Section 3 is when you start to get into your instructional units. This is your instructional units for the entire year or semester. So you want to list what are the actual instructional units, and then also how long are you going to plan to spend on each of these units. So you can do this by days or lessons. Once again, using a chart is very useful for this. The other thing you're going to want to make sure you include is you're going to want to include a timeline. So you can incorporate that into the chart. So for example, in September, if you're going to spend the first 2 weeks in September, you would have that in the chart as well. But make sure you have a timeline so that you're covering the entire year. Also, reflect on and create a list of materials that are needed for these instructional units. So this chart can get pretty lengthy because you are covering an entire year or a semester. But you want to provide as much information. So if someone needed to walk into your classroom and they needed to know where you were in your sequence throughout the year, they're going to be able to tell immediately, based on this long-range plan, where you are and where you're going. So that's section 3. Section 4 is how are you going to evaluate your students? Are you going to assess them using homework, tests, projects? Create a chart, we love charts once again, that lists the different types of assessments you're going to use in this class. What are the criteria that you're going to use in assessing these assessments? How are you weighting these grades? So how do they work? Is homework worth 10% or a certain number of points in your class? And finally, what is the way that you're going to maintain these records? Are you going to use an Excel spreadsheet? Are you going to use PowerTeacher? What is your system for maintaining these? So once again, create a chart that tells me the assessment types, the criteria for evaluating, how it's being graded, and where you're maintaining this. As with all the other sections, there's a reflection. So tell me, how did you come up with this plan? What information is this going to provide you? What kind of reports are you going to give? Kind of reflect on the idea of evaluating student progress and achievement. Section 5 is new at Charleston Southern, and we're trying to do exactly what you're going to be doing out in the schools. And so they're doing something called Student Learning Outcomes, the SLOs. And so we've embedded SLOs into the long-range plan for both your methods and your clinical practice experiences. So you're going to want to work closely with your cooperating teacher because they've already done a student learning outcome for their class. But you're going to want to work with them, and basically it just works through this entire chart. So are you doing an individual class student learning outcome, or is it a team goal? Once again, is it by class or is it by course? Over on the chart, you're going to say, is this a semester long, year long, or a quarter long student learning outcome goal? Then you're going to want to have, when are you doing your pre-assessment and post-assessments for the student learning outcome? So when are you going to test where they are and then how far they've come? The next couple sections of this chart kind of repeat what you've already done, so this should be pretty easy. Your student population, you're going to go back to section 1 and kind of describe out who are your students. So take that chart and put it into words. The second part of your student learning outcomes are historical and trend data. So is there any applicable data from the past that you know about either your students or the assessments that you're going to be using? Your baseline data is what you get from your pre-assessment. So how do you measure and where are your students before you start teaching them, working with them on this learning outcome? Post-assessment is the assessment you do at the end of the time period. Then you're going to describe in the 5th section here, how are you going to monitor the progress of your students? How are you going to make sure that they're meeting this student learning outcome? You then want to create a learning goal or an objective for this one specific student learning outcome. This could come specifically from section 2 where you have your learning and developmental goals. The 7th part of a student learning outcome is where you identify the content standards and indicators that align to the student learning outcome. So go to the South Carolina standards for this class, and you're going to actually copy and paste the goals and indicators into this section of the student learning outcome. Section 8 of the student learning outcomes is all about growth targets. So is it going to be tiered, individual, targeted? Are you just looking at one subpopulation of your students? Are you looking at all your students? And then you're going to answer these 2 questions about the growth targets. And the last section of this is the instructional strategies. What is the best instructional practices you plan to use with the content to ensure your students are meeting the student learning outcomes? So all of that together is what's called a student learning outcome, or a SLO. And so you'll have that as part of the long-range plan. The next section of the long-range plan is all about your classroom management rules and procedures. So this is where you're going to take information that you've possibly created in other classes, but you're going to want to talk about your instructional and non-instructional routines. What are the rules you have in your class? How are you going to come up with the rules? What's going to be your plan from classroom management? Reflect on classroom management. How are you going to communicate with your parents? Think about what that means in your classroom with your communication with parents. And then finally, the very last section, it kind of gets tucked in at the end here, but it's how are you going to adjust your long-range plan? So you sit down in July or August and create this long-range plan for the entire year, but as we all know, things happen like hurricanes or snow days or ice days. So how often are you going to adjust and look at your long-range plan and make any necessary adjustments that are needed? So you're going to want to talk about that. That's the last part of your long-range plan. You'll see, again, we're using a 4-level rubric, as we are in most education classes now. So each area of the long-range plan will be assessed on 4 levels. Please read through these descriptors. Remember, your goal is level 3 proficient. That is what you're aiming for. Very few students will actually get to the level 4, and that's okay. Level 3 is proficient. That is exactly where you need to be. So that is a brief overview of the long-range plan and how you're going to be doing it this semester and next semester. If you have any questions or concerns, talk to your methods professor or instructor, and they will give you more guidance on this.